What is Next.js? Made by Vercel, Next.js is a framework built on top of another framework called React that was made by Facebook, now known as Meta, to allow for JavaScript-first front-end web development. Vercel aims to enhance the front-end capabilities of React with some full-stack-ish capabilities. I say full-stack-ish because I'd hesitate to call the data fetching and server-side rendering offered by Next.js a full back-end capability, but it's a great start, and it makes it a heck of a lot easier for most new web devs to deal with fetching and some of the server-side stuff. So I'd say that full-stack-ish is apt. So let's discuss some of the main features of Next.js. Now, for each of these, we're going to have our own video within this tutorial series that'll go through each of these individual features. But for right now, let's just describe them at a high level. And we're starting here with routing. And there's two types. You can see here app router and page router. We'll have our own video to explain both. But just for future reference, in my tutorials, I'll be using app router since it's considered the default in Next.js. And I personally believe it's the easier one to use for new developers. But just to discuss routing real quick, Next.js comes with a file-based routing system built on server components. And we'll discuss server components in a second. But this means your file folder structure or directory structure automatically defines the routes that users can use to navigate through your website. There's built-in support for shared layouts and nested routings. So basically, like in this URL here, -docs, if we were to go into another part of it, right, /doc/app/ building your application /rendering, each of these would just be its own folder. There's intuitive loading states and error handling that you can add, basically by just adding an additional file to your app structure. And there's no need for complex route configurations in a separate file. It's all just handled by where you put the folders in your project and the individual files, page, layout, error, loading, etc. We'll go over those more in detail in the routing tutorial, but hopefully that gave you a good impression about routing at a high level. Next, to discuss about rendering, Next.js gives you strong flexibility over both client and server components. And so client side, just think about it as being a part of the browser, right? Or on the browser side, and that being the client. Server side is wherever you're hosting your website, be it via Vercel, because Next.js works really well with Vercel, or the base CSPs, right? AWS, Azure, or on bare metal servers that you have somewhere, self-hosting, all that good stuff. Server components allow for you to load pages faster with reduced amount of complexity in your code. And client components are basically whenever you need interactivity, state management, that's where client components come into effect. There's static rendering for content that doesn't change very often, dynamic rendering for frequently updated content, and streaming capabilities, both on Edge and Node.js runtimes. Next up, we're going to talk about data fetching. And before, in the past, you'd use something like Ajax or the Fetch API, and basically it's still available, but it's been extended. It still allows for you to use async await in your server components, which allow for, again, asynchronous fetches. An extended fetch API with built-in request memorization, automatic data caching to reduce database load, and flexible data revalidation strategies. And usually you use a different package or framework like Tanstack or in conjunction with tRPC, Hano, etc., to be able to manage a lot of the state and interaction with serverless services like Neon that we'll be using in a lot of tutorials. Superbase is another popular serverless database option. With our data fetching, we're just really focused on actually writing the fetch, but not actually worrying about all the individual configuration details that a very complex, Ajax query back in the day would have had us manage. Another thing is styling. So Next.js doesn't force you into any particular styling choice, though I do recommend using Tailwind CSS. If you're a whiz with CSS, you're welcome to use it. In most of my tutorials, I'll be focusing on using Tailwind CSS because it's the most beginner friendly, but you're totally welcome to use CSS modules for component scope styles. There's support for CSS in JavaScript, and there's global styles also when you need them. So pick whichever one you think works best for you and your project. There's optimizations. There's an image component that they provide for responsive optimized images. There's also fonts. We'll see that later on available in kind of the layout level. There's script optimization for third-party scripts, automatic code splitting and bundling. That's kind of an advanced feature, but not necessarily something that you really have to worry about. And so those are pretty much the primary optimizations that Next.js provides. But the one that I really think is important here is its support for TypeScript. I think that for most beginners, a lot of people would jump straight into JavaScript just because they don't want to work with the strict typing system. But I think it's really important to get used to improved type checking and kind of compiling your code and making sure that there are no type mismatches as your code base grows. And especially when you're doing data fetching, it's just really important to be able to pre-declare what types you expect there are, especially if there's a range of types. It just cleans up so much messiness. And if you want to work professionally as a web developer, chances are you're going to be working a lot with TypeScript going into the future, or you're going to be converting TypeScript code over, or JavaScript code over to TypeScript. So I think it's really important for beginners to take a little bit of pain in learning TypeScript, but you're going to thank yourself later on by doing so. So with all these powerful features that Next.js offers, it creates a kind of, again, complete-ish framework for modern web development. And I think it's great because it's a good balance between strong developer experience and performance. I think a lot of people really kind of poo-poo on different things about Next.js because, it's not super performant, or, these certain things are kind of confusing. But I'll be completely honest, out of all of the different frameworks that I've used, from a developer experience perspective and getting started, prototyping, building an MVP, Next.js is hands down my top preferred option. Certainly, other frameworks are better for other reasons, and we can go into that in each of the individual framework tutorials. But just from a Next.js perspective, right, from a beginner's perspective, from we're just getting something done as quickly as possible, and that is decently performant enough, and presumably will only get better, I think it's a great choice for people to use. So on to the next part, where we'll be focusing on installing Next.js and starting to use it to build a website.